go.
We have many questions.
You want to start or which one?
I start.
Yeah.
I know you said you give long answers, but try anyway to not make it long.
I will try to be concise.
How did you get the idea to write a book about totalitarianism? How was that? How did it start? That you started to think about?
It started in a very organic way. I just, in my academic career, I first focused on problems in scientific research. I was one of the people who contributed to the literature on the replication crisis in the sciences, and then I started to focus on individual psychological functioning. I investigated the impact of speech on the human body and soul, let's say. Investigated how speech and conversations change the biochemistry of the blood, for instance. And then I moved on to mass psychology because I noticed that, a large part of our psychological functioning can never be understood on the basis of just individual psychological mechanisms. For instance, I noticed that when I tried to publish my work on the replication crisis, in which I showed that a major part of the research in psychology is completely lacks all reliability and validity. And I noticed that while I tried to publish these findings, that most people really, while the examples I gave were very tangible and concrete and clearly showed why most psychological research can never lead up to valid statistical inference, for instance, and most people really didn't want to see that in the academic world. A certain part wanted to see it, and these people really, I became quite known with this work around the world, but 90% of the researchers were angry with me, were mad with me. And that might have been one of the things that prompted me to start to study mass psychology. Like, how is it possible that really intelligent people can become so blind under certain conditions? And I noticed that you cannot explain that only on the basis of individual psychological processes. You need mass psychology. And I lectured on mass psychology for a few years. And then I knew that I would be giving a series of courses at university on culture critics. And I started to understand, at that moment I started to focus on how new societal structures emerged throughout the last few centuries, and I started to understand that in the first half of the 20th century we have seen the emergence of a completely new kind of state system, which is the totalitarian state. And in a strange way, I suddenly realized that this totalitarianism and totalitarian state, that it was connected to a phenomenon that I studied before, namely mass phenomena, mass psychology. Like, as I explained, that's a difference between a totalitarian state and a classical dictatorship, that a totalitarian state is based on mass formation. And that was how it started. And in 2071, I started to think in a more systematic way about totalitarianism, and then suddenly the corona crisis set in, and I saw everything that I had been studying in the years before just happening before my eyes. I said, look, that's what a mass formation is for the first time since the Second World War, or since the Nazi Germany. We could see a really large-scale mass formation in Europe and globally, actually, happening. And then I started to write, and I speeded up, and I decided, look, I will hurry a little bit, yes, it fitted in, and I will finish this book on totalitarianism as soon as possible. And I think somewhere in 2021 it was published. I'm not sure anymore. I think it was 2021. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned in the book, or I'm not sure, maybe you mentioned it in another book, but I think in this book, that highly educated people fall easier for mass formation.
Yeah.
And manipulative propaganda. Why? Why do you think that happens to them?
That, nobody really knows, but there are several possible explanations, of course. Like, first and for all, people who are highly educated, or probably usually rather conformist people. They try to get a degree because they know that a degree will bring them closer to, let's say, social ideal images, and they will embody the perfect citizen when they have a high degree. That might be one reason. There's people who participate in the educational system for a long time, usually are people, not always of course, but usually are people who are more conformist. That's one possible explanation. The second one, which is at least equally important, is that our educational system and our school system, psychologically speaking, is a kind of propaganda, is a kind of indoctrination. That's the explanation Jacques Ellul gives. Jacques Ellul is, in my opinion, the most sharp-minded writer about propaganda. And he writes in his book on propaganda that propaganda can never be successful if it is not preceded by a long-term psychological indoctrination. And he says our educational system is the most important indoctrination, and then like our educational system doesn't learn people to think for themselves. It learns them all to think in the same way. It learns them to think in a way that fits the dominant view of man in the world, which is the materialist, rationalist view of man in the world. And so, once people learn to think in these categories, they are perfectly prepared for propaganda. You could see it very clearly, like people who are
programmed.
People who or a doctor, for instance, think usually, not always, but usually in such a materialist way, in such a biochemical reductionist way, that they perfectly accepted the expert's explanation for the virus, the narrative about the jabs, about the vaccines, and so on. So the more people think in a biological reductionist way, the more they will be open for propaganda, which uses exactly these terms. So that's something that is often underestimated. Propaganda can never be successful without indoctrination. First indoctrination, then propaganda. And our school system, often not intentionally, but has the function of to indoctrinate. Yes.
I will use one of your questions.
Yeah, use mine, doesn't matter.
That people that, although I am also highly educated, but I never really fitted into a system, and I never felt at home. That's the one.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you can read it.
Yeah.
I really felt.
So this is more hypothetical. It's just a question, just a hypothetical question. You stated many people have purely studied to get a diploma lose their passion to know. Is it possible that many of those who are critical and truly interested in knowing more, at least wanting to know differently more, have in common that they don't feel at home in this society, which only cares about diplomas and titles?
Yes, that's also true. I also noticed that very well myself. Like when I started to study at university, or let me put it differently. After 1.5 years at university, I stopped to study for my degree because I just noticed that I had to study so much that didn't interest me, and that, in my opinion, also wasn't very interesting. It wasn't very interesting. I stopped for a few years, for 3 years, and I started to attend only classes that I liked in philosophy, psychology, history of art, drawing, painting, and so on. But after 3 years, I decided to go back because I knew by then that I wanted to have a private practice as a psychotherapist, and I needed the degree, so I went back. But I think it's true. I think many people who really have this strong passion to know don't feel very happy in our educational system. That's true. Yes, that's an additional factor that might play a role in the fact that highly educated people are usually much more sensitive, much more vulnerable for mass information.
Yeah.
Do you have then psychotherapy practice?
Yes.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
This I know.
Yeah.
Okay. But are you also still a professor or not? Because you do. They allow you to.
I lost, my book was banned. I cannot use my book anymore in my classes on culture critics, and I lost a series of classes at university on culture critics. But for the rest, Yes, I'm still allowed to teach. I'm a fully, I was a tenured professor, which is a very protected status in Belgium. And of course, I always mention that, just at the human level, many of my colleagues are not bad people. They're just people who blindly conform to the system. And of course, I feel a lot of tension now, and sometimes it's not very, very funny for me anymore at university. But still, that doesn't mean that I think they are fundamentally, at the human level, sometimes I can appreciate them. But I chose myself to reduce my percentage at university from 100% to 30%.
30.
Yes, to 30. I just because I find much more satisfaction now in just giving lectures, writing a new book, and being away a little bit of the very bureaucratic academic system. Yeah.
Maybe that follows to that. You have a feeling that you're now more following, I'm not saying a word, but your soul task?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
And you're also more yourself, your true self, than you were before in this academic world.
It feels more sincere what I do. Yeah, it feels more sincere. And I spent my time at university in the good way, I think. Like when I started to do my PhD, I was expected to do a classical research in psychology, investigating statistical associations between personality and depressive symptoms. And I started to do that research, and I immediately noticed, look, with this kind of research methods, you never can study these phenomena in an interesting way. All these psychological tests, they are not valid and they are not reliable. And if you measure the same thing with 3 different tests, you find 3 times a completely different result. So I asked my promoter, and that I'm very happy that I did that. If I, instead of doing that research, if I could do research investigating the quality of research. And that was where my academic career started. And I published a lot of papers on this topic.
That's led to the book, the pursuit of...
Yeah, the pursuit of objectivity and psychology. Yes. And immediately I was under fire at university. But still, I had a lot of publications. I had my degree in clinical psychology and a master degree in statistics, and so on. And the system was fair enough I think I had more than 2 or 3 times more publications than the second candidate. And the system was fair enough to give me the professorship. But also, as soon as I was a professor, there were a lot of problems. People were angry with me. My first book actually was also banned, The Pursuit of Objectivity of Psychology. Using an excuse, doesn't matter, but still, I always remained calm and polite, but I said what I thought was sincere to say. And when the corona crisis started, I was very well prepared. I had been trained for 15 years to say controversial things without getting angry and remaining calm. Always very calm.
I must admit, I admire that part of you, because that's also, you already as a child, you couldn't stand injustice. As you said in the interview with Bosch. You even stepped up when there was an unfair situation going on in which one was against many. How come already then you were not scared? We both asked that question.
I was not scared to fight physically as a child. I don't know why, but I was never scared physically. And even I also never thought. I just thought, if I think it was necessary, I just started to fight. And no matter how much the other...
Did you have to fight in your own family with your brothers? How did that...
I come from a big family.
13 children.
Yes, 13 children. And I was one of the youngest. I don't think I learned it there, no. But I think in my father's family, like my grandfather, my grand-grandfather and so on, they were all famous they were physically very strong. And they were all famous, like when there was a fight in a pub or something, they came to my grandfather's house and asked him, "No, you have to come with us. There's a fight and someone will get killed and you're afraid." And my grandfather just went to the pub. He said, "You have to stop, and if you don't, I will make you stop," he said. And he was like, yes, and then he went home again.
So you did get it from the family.
I was raised sometimes hearing these narratives, and they will probably have an impact on who I am, yes. But, and I feel that it was the same attitude at university. I said, like, look, if I study something, and in my ultimate analysis, I think this is true, I will say it. No matter how many people say that it is not true, I will just say what I think, no matter with how many you are. And I continue to do that until today, but that doesn't mean I'm sometimes not scared. Sometimes I'm scared. Sometimes, like in the beginning of the Corona crisis, I just realized, like, I think I was the first to speak out in Belgium during the first week of the crisis. And I knew, like, look, you're a full professor now. You shouldn't worry anymore about a job or money or no matter what until you die. But with what you do now, you can screw it up. And still, I felt like, look, I have to do it. Yeah. If I don't do it, I will feel a coward for the rest of my life. And I decided to do it. And I cannot say that I was not scared. I was scared. Believe me, I was scared. Yes. Yeah.
That is one of, I don't know, but this is one question that comes to that fits a bit. So what did you learn personally these last years? What kind of new insights did you get about life? Oh, personally.
A lot. But it's not so easy to describe it with words. But for instance, throughout the last 4 years, when I started speaking out in public space, let's say, a lot of mud was thrown at me. My reputation was smeared severely, really, like national television in Belgium. I saw it. I was on the front page of all newspapers, sometimes for weeks straight, saying that I was a liar, an indoctrinator of students, right-wing fascist.
Even there was this thing in the classroom that students or
yes,
some
anonymous students. Yes, anonymous students. While other students just stood up and said, "Look, that's not true. He's not like that, completely not," during the classes. But they refused to interview these people, and these people sometimes just spoke out on the social media, but they refused to interview anonymous students saying all kinds of things. Believe me, that were completely wrong. Everyone who would watch the videotapes of my courses at university would see that I have a completely different style as the style I mentioned there. So, but what I learned was, I always, from the beginning, I knew, like, even I was surprised myself. I wrote my first opinion paper, which was titled "The Fear of the Virus is More Dangerous Than the Virus Itself," and it was spread around Belgium, and even national television published it on their website. It was the only article they have published. After that, they never published one again. But in the first days of the crisis, there was like a certain space where also people on national television doubted, like, what will we do? Will we go along with this narrative or not? And nobody really knew. So like in Belgium, I think almost everyone read that first opinion paper, or like a huge percentage. But immediately, I was under heavy fire, and I realized immediately, no matter how much hate speech and people direct at you, you will have to stay calm. And I always, on my social media, I just answered in as quietly as possible, as calmly as possible, as invitingly as possible. Like, look, you can criticize me, just tell me, explain me, what do you think, and why do you think what I say is dangerous or not true, and so on and so on. And I noticed something, like, while I continue to react, you could say, in a open and connecting and non-violent way, I really noticed, I observed that slowly I felt like how a very soft and warm power grew stronger in me. Really, it was something that I really noticed that. While month after month I answered in a calm way, and that I felt how something very soft and warm got stronger in me, and how this really compensated for everything I lost at the level of my public identity. It just was very, very satisfying for me.
And that was actually, you could say that from that before you were stronger on this intellectual part, more in the head, and now you came more in contact with your feeling and with your heart. Right?
Yes, I like in my new book, which is about the psychology of truth. I focus on these two different parts of our identity. On the one hand, the ego, which is the part of ourselves which is literally related to the surface of our body, our outer ideal image, which is associated to a matrix of social rules. This is one part of our identity. That's our ego structure. But then hidden behind that ego, literally behind that ego, you find a resonating and body, and that's the material basis of the soul, you could say, what we call the soul. And when you speak in a sincere way, this part of yourself, this soul, this resonating part, gets stronger and stronger, and your ego structure can get weaker. You feel that it's not necessary anymore to invest so much energy in the ego structure, and that's when you feel that's when you start to feel more connected indeed with who you really are, with what you feel inside, and that's when your intuition gets stronger.
And that's the biggest gift you can get.
Yeah.
That's the most precious thing.
I give these workshops in sincere speech in Belgium and Holland. But that's exactly what I think is the most beautiful product or effect or fruit of a continued practicing of the art of sincere speech. Your intuition gets stronger. You see through the world of appearances, see through the world of the ego, and you start to resonate again. In the most direct way, you really resonate, just like a small child resonates with the world around it. A small child has a tremendous learning capacity, incomparably much bigger than the learning capacity of a grown-up, and that it's because it has no ego yet. The ego starts at 6 months to 8 months to 9 months of age, and before it has an ego, it has this immense capacity to resonate with the world around it, and it learns in a very straightforward way. And that capacity, if your ego structure gets weaker again, that capacity to resonate start to grow again, start to increase again, and that's that capacity to resonate, which is also the basis for this supreme intuition, which, for instance, the samurai masters had in Japan. We all knew that in samurai culture, the entire training in the martial arts resulted in a kind of intuition of the warrior, which was extremely strong. And they all knew, the samurai, that the training that always should try to reduce the ego. If you can leave your ego behind, you have the supreme capacity to resonate with the world and the supreme intuition which you need on the battlefield to survive. Samurai said, no matter how well you're technically trained, you will never survive on the battlefield without this intuition. You have to feel when someone shoots an arrow at your back, and so on. This intuition, the entire training of a samurai, aimed at the development of that intuition. That is also something you develop when you practice the art of sincere speech, because sincere speech is exactly this kind of speech, which penetrates through the ego, and in which you sow something of your soul, which is hidden behind the ego. That's exactly what sincere speech is. Sincere speech is this kind of speech, which doesn't start from the matrix of social rules or your outer ideal images, which emanates, emerges from your resonating feeling inside of yourselves. This Einfühlung, as Einstein called it.
Wait, yeah, it was me. Yeah, you said before also that, of course, democracy is on the threat. That's clear. That's almost everywhere. But at the same time, at least in the fields that I'm looking, also there is a sort of a kind of awakening going on in consciousness, you know. And of course, you have all kind of levels of awakening, all kind of ideas about spirituality and about the soul, all that. But it's happening, and it's happening on a massive scale. I can tell you that it's really happening.
It is.
Are these two, you probably stated it already, are these two somehow connected?
Oh, yeah, of course they are. Yes. You know, on the one hand, I definitely agree. We live in a democracy, as described by Aldous Huxley in his book, Brave New World Revisited. No, later on, he wrote a second book, Brave New World Revisited. And he said, like, very soon we will live in a system which looks perfectly like a democracy at the surface, from the outside. You will have a parliament, you will have a court, you will have everything. And he said, and every broadcast on television, every interview will be about the importance of democracy. But under the surface, it will be a fully fledged totalitarian system which is ruled by a small number of oligarchs with their military and police apparatus, and a very well-trained army of mind manipulators, he said. So I think in that respect, Huxley was much closer in his prophetic idea of future totalitarianism. He wrote this in 1952. He was much closer to how future totalitarianism actually would look like than Orwell, for instance. Huxley was closer, I think, to
more fine, more refined. But the other part, the awakening that is going on in consciousness.
Yeah, what we see now is, on the one hand, indeed, as Huxley predicted, a mass in the grip of the propaganda of the global institutions. But on the other hand, very fastly now, we see the emergence of a group of people which unites more and more, which connects through sincere speech. So that's what we see. A mass in the grip of a new kind of lie, which we call propaganda, and the group which really unifies and connects, because they start to reappreciate the value of sincerity and true speech.
That's who we really are as humans.
And that's all, that happens all at the same time. When you speak sincerely, you connect at the same time with yourself and who you really are, and with the other.
Because that was the process also. Individual, your process is exactly that.
Yes. And I even didn't realize it first. Not at all. It's now, it's first now, while I started to think about my next book, The Psychology of Truth, that I started to realize that was what has happened in myself. Yes. And that's a strange thing. Like sincere speech, and that's what my workshops are about. It at the same time connects a human being to another human being. Sincere speech is resonating speech, someone who speaks sincerely, and someone else who opens up, allows the sincere words to enter his own body, and then you have the phenomenon of resonance, really, literally, as two strings that vibrate together on the same frequency, but at the same time, it also connects you to yourself, because while you speak sincerely, you feel the resonance, and you feel, oh, but that's who I am.
And it flows
that's
out.
who I am.
And it flows out also.
Yeah.
Like it comes almost through you.
It comes through you, exactly. And that's why it also reconnects you with the universe. It reconnects you with nature. So you can see, and it reconnects you with your sexuality, with your body, with yourself. It creates harmony. It harmonizes all the relationships with yourself, your body, and so on. So that's what sincerity, strangely enough, does, even without you realizing it, because I didn't realize it at the moment.
But it happened. But you also then you have to then see also how many of these fields that you just say are corrupted by the outside world. Lots of it. I mean, with everybody in a different way, but there is a sort of corrupted field of misinformation in us.
Of course.
Of who we are not.
Of course. The more sincere you become, the more sharp-minded you become in seeing corruption and propaganda outside of you. You start to be capable of clearly distinguishing truth and appearance. And that's exactly what the samurai, again, I refer to the samurai again, said. The art, the martial arts, in the end, or the art of being capable of distinguishing truth and lie, they said. The entire martial arts, the essence of the martial arts is being capable to know whether your enemy is showing who he really is, or whether he is doing something to mislead you, to trick you.
And on these workshops, you have some exercises where you encourage people that this comes out of them.
Oh yes. It's 4 days, the workshops, and 50% of theory of truth, of the psychology of truth speech, which includes a complete theory on how a child develops in a linguistic relationship with other people, even in the womb. Before a child is born, it resonates with the voice of the mother, for instance. That's something that there is even consensus upon that. We know now that a child in the womb, before it is born, learns the voice of the mother already. It resonates already with the voice of the mother, and then it's born. The resonance continues. It imitates, the child imitates the facial expressions, the body postures, but also the sounds the mother makes. And in this way, it connects to her. It has a perfect knowledge, a young child, about the truth of the mother. It feels what she feels. Its body resonates perfectly with the body of the mother. It feels everything the mother feels. So a child, when it is very young, lives in truth. It knows the truth. You cannot hide the truth for a child. A child knows, by the age of 6 months, a child perfectly knows the truth of the entire family system around it. It incorporated the truth in its body memory. But the only problem is, it doesn't have access with semantic knowledge to that body memory. It cannot articulate what it feels in its body, the truth it feels in its body, and express it and give it to someone else. It doesn't have that capacity. So that's what that capacity starts to develop. From when the ego is born. But anyway, I can't go into that now, but that's what the workshops are all about. The workshops are all about this, how a child develops in a linguistic relationship with other people, and how we can learn to speak, not from the ego, but from the soul. Yeah.
Because now you mentioned your mother. That was also interesting in the one with Boss. I just had this... there's two things. First of all, I remember that you said that when you were biking, you suddenly realized, because your mother could close herself and could suddenly be cold. Well, she was oversensitive, and you realized I'm also oversensitive. I'm also doing the same when it's too much. And you forgave. Was that also part of this process of you becoming more closer to your soul?
That was long before the corona crisis.
That was before the corona.
Yes, I went through a very long psychoanalytic cure, which is for me essentially practicing the art of good speech. That's also how Lacan, a French psychoanalyst, called psychoanalysis. For me, Lacan is by far the most sharp-minded psychologist of the 20th century.
And you also wrote a book about him.
Yeah, I wrote a book about him.
It was the second book.
Lacan is extremely difficult. Like Noam Chomsky said, I can easily understand quantum physics, but I cannot understand Lacan. He said,
and you could.
What he meant was, when you cannot understand Lacan, Lacan is a piece of nonsense, which is, and I knew from the beginning that it was not true. I knew that I sensed that there was a perfect logic in Lacan. And my second book was all about, the title was Lacan's Logic of Subjectivity. And there were many Lacanians, and many of them were very intelligent people, but nobody really tried to show the strict, logical, mathematical structure in Lacan's work. And I decided to do that. I decided to write a book showing the logical, mathematical structure in Lacan. That's exactly what, for Lacan, psychoanalysis was the art of good speech, the art of sincere speech. Developing the capacity to say something about yourself, to give yourself in words to someone else. And that's the essence of love. That's the essence of love. Meeting someone of whom you feel that what you say really arrives in the other. And love is a resonance. It's feeling that you resonate with someone, that in a strange way, the other person is capable of hearing your soul message, is hearing yourself in your words. And so I went through a very long psychoanalytic cure. And the experience you refer to happened somewhere in the middle of my psychoanalytic cure, I think. I suddenly realized indeed, like, look, but I do exactly the same as my mother.
Yeah, because from the moment, of course, you accept that part of your mother. Because there was another part of your mother that I found interesting. Because I thought, I can't really see it with him. Your mother was very compliant and dutiful.
Yes.
You said it in of course. And I think you are also, but you're now, I can see that you're compliant and dutiful to truth.
Yes. My father was extremely non-conformist.
Yeah, I know.
He was someone who was a very intelligent person, I think, who read a lot and who was he didn't want me to go to university or to school. He said, you will lose every real and genuine passion for knowledge there, which was not true. I didn't lose it. And he was a very independent thinker. He was a non-conformist, but not in a
aggressive way.
No, not at all. He really listened, and then he just made his own choices and decided to believe what he wanted to believe. But my mother was, and he was also a very dominant, even tyrannical person actually, in his negative. He had a very negative side as well, I think.
But maybe you experienced that less because you were the 12th child, so the bigger children, the older ones probably felt that more than
yes, probably. Yes,
probably. It was probably already a bit less.
Yes. I think so. But my mother indeed was very compliant, rather submissive in nature. Most people would think I look much more like my father, I think, than like my mother. But she was very sensitive and a very warm heart. My father as well. He could be very hard, very dominant, but he was very sensitive.
But this compliance, this dutiful.
Yes.
You have it.
In what sense you think? What?
Can I give an example?
I agree. I do agree.
Yeah.
But I just.
For example, he told me when he was watching this video or this talk with the guy, you mentioned that your oldest, the first child, committed suicide, and the guy said this is very courageous deed, and you didn't. I mean, you said I would never do that, but you didn't go really against it. You were still kind of polite.
I felt you first were shocked a bit by his statement. I could feel that.
Yeah, but you didn't really
that's a different story. Yeah. Because that was quite like, okay, I would say the same as you. But you reacted still. Okay, calm. you didn't go into a discussion here. You just said I would never do that. You kept it close to yourself.
You know, and I rarely go into confrontations. I always, and maybe I don't know. I should do it more. I have no idea, but I know I always just focus on. No, what do I really think about it, without going against someone else too much.
Yeah. With that said, I think your dutifulness is to truth. You see, that's your mother was dutiful. You could say,
I know what you mean.
Because your ego,
the gift of
if your ego becomes less important than the sincerity in you of the soul, you are compliant to the soul.
Yes, I know. Yes, I know what you mean, and I try to be compliant to the soul. Yes, definitely, but it's not easy, and you have to be willing to lose a lot, of course, and I think I will. I will be prepared to lose a lot, if not everything, if necessary. But I have no ambition to become a martyr. I have not.
Oh yeah,
maybe,
but that's something.
Yes. Maybe. I think you have to be prepared to die for truth, but you have to love life as much as possible.
But
and to try to stay alive as long as possible without lapsing into a completely inauthentic and insincere life. But life is such a gift, and we should really value that as much as possible. And you know, I also noticed that this even brings you closer to the truth, because the moment in which you speak the truth in such a way that you get killed is often the moment in which your truth became a little bit aggressive and violent. And the truth really is soft and warm, I think. But even then, of course, you can get killed
because for others,
of course. And then you have to be prepared to be killed.
Now, I didn't mean, but martyr. I think we all in the process of becoming closer to self, we have to go through this feeling that we are a martyr. We need to experience it because we have to give up something. We have to give up what we think we are in order to become who we are. So there is a sort of martyr phase in this whole process.
You lose something. I wouldn't call it a martyr phase, but you have to. You know, it's just logical. If you speak the truth, you will lose a lot in the world of appearances, but you will win something in the real world. And that's the only thing that matters in the end.
Exactly.
It's even literally like that, I think.
Sanje,
do you still have something?
Yeah, you said which words did you use for the mother?
Compliant and dutiful.
But in this Corona thing, she didn't fall into a trap, and none of your brothers and sisters.
Almost none.
Yeah, they are all.
In the beginning, they were into the narrative a little bit.
They were.
A little bit, but I think they decided immediately that, for instance, they wouldn't take the vaccine, for instance. And everyone in my family, I think, more or less. I know that in the beginning, many of them believed the narrative a little bit. But then I immediately said, "Oh, but I won't go along with that, and I will speak out." And slowly, they also, I think they also started to see, like, okay, indeed, there is something fundamentally wrong with this virus narrative. But from the beginning, I felt really supported.
That's what I wanted to ask. How did they respond to your engagement and exposure?
Oh, they
were proud. They are proud of you also.
Yes, they were proud.
Just one last question. Just one. You said you wrote this about that there's 85% of medical, but also psychological. The whole thing is not reproducible. So the conclusions are not acceptable. And now there's this enormous amount of scientific lies that were told to the world during this Corona stuff. Now we see the consequences of these lies, which are severe. It will only become more and more. How can we ever trust science again?
Well, you know, we have to distinguish between science and the academic world, I think. In the academic world, every discourse that is institutionalized slowly changes, and it changes in a specific direction. It lapses into exactly the opposite of what it initially tried to convey. Like, science started from a virtue, the virtue of sincerity, actually, and truth, of course. Yes, and slowly it lapsed into exactly the opposite, hollow rhetorics, and like now, indeed, as you said, 85% of the academic papers published in the medical sciences are not reproducible, which means as much without any objective scientific value. How can we ever trust science again? You know, I think we'll move to an awareness that scientific knowledge, as a set of rational ideas, is nothing essential at all. It's important, of course. It's very important. And that's exactly what the great scientists realized. That was exactly what they arrived at an understanding that everything that you can grasp in the categories of rational thinking is not essential. And that the essence always transcends rational understanding. And that the real knowledge is something different than rational knowledge. Like, once we realize that, and once society is led by this intuitive, transcending, resonating knowledge, we will have the perfect capacity to distinguish between true science and false science. And we will have proportional respect for true science without expecting too much of it. Because we will know that the real knowledge is of a different nature.
We will be independent from it, more independent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
for your
much.
time.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
I would still like to ask you for email if I have some
Yes, I will write it down.
extra questions.
But please mention very clearly
Yeah.
that it is about this interview. Because like this morning I found 14,363 mails in my inbox, to give you an idea.
I thought so.
My secretary said, why do you not answer my mails? I sent you the mails, it's urgent. And I sent her a screenshot. I said, Tineke, because of this, 14,363 mails.